Okay, we are recording. So welcome everyone to my class called How to Buy a Home on a Budget. So I'm very excited to be able to present this class this evening. I thought it was some information that's really, I think, needed in our market today. There's just so many people that are concerned about being able to buy a house right now. Everyone's aware that interest rates are a little on the higher side relative to where they've been for years. Home prices are going up, have gone up over the last couple of years. So I think the general sentiment is that people are concerned it's just not affordable to buy a house. But a lot of that has to do with just education and not being aware of what is needed to buy a house and some strategies to stay on budget. So everybody has a monthly budget, how much they spend on their property, whether it's their rent or their home that they own. So you all have a budget. So my goal is to show home buyers or folks that they can get into a house and stay on budget. They just have to consider all of the variables that go into what your mortgage payment is made up of and how to select a home that will keep you in that budget that you have. So that's kind of my goal tonight, is to talk a little bit about that, some things that we're seeing even in today's market that you can take advantage of and keep yourself on budget, but get into a home and be a homeowner. So I'm going to get started. And if for some reason something funny happens with my screen, just shout out and do let me know if you can't see or you can't hear. We'll make sure we get that fixed. So to get started, why in the world would you want to buy a home? This is probably the most important point if we're going to talk about doing it on a budget. The value of owning a home, number one, there's several things, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But the first thing is to grow your financial wealth. Every time that you make your mortgage payment, you are putting some money into the principal of your loan. So you're paying down the principal of your loan, and over 30 years, usually, you have paid off your house and then you own it, and you've got all of that equity and it's your asset. So it's really like putting money into savings every month with your mortgage. There's also deductions that you get to take on your income tax with your mortgage interest that you pay and your property tax payments. So this actually reduces the amount that you are taxed on with your income tax. So I created this scenario, and we're going to use it throughout the evening as far as talking about one particular house that we're going to use a sale price of $275,000 with a down payment of 3.5%. That would be the minimum that you need for an FHA loan. Interest rate at 6.5%, which might be a little bit lower than today's market, but that's what we're going to use for this scenario. 30-year loan, and assuming that we close in September. So what I have here, the graphic, is an amortization schedule. If you're not familiar with that, they actually provide that at closing for buyers, and it's pages after page. It's 30 years worth of your monthly payments that you're paying on your mortgage. And with each line, it tells you with that payment for that month's mortgage, what goes into it. So this, I just wanted to show you, your mortgage payment is made up of your interest, your principal, your property taxes, your homeowner's insurance, and PMI or MIP, so mortgage insurance, if that's applicable. So in this scenario, even at 6.5% interest rate, the very first payment that you make, you're putting $240 towards the principal of your loan. So that's like putting $240 into a savings account every month. So owning property forces you to save money because you're putting money back into your pocket. Here's a couple other reasons why it's a great idea to buy a home and be a homeowner. First of all, you could potentially use part of that space as extra rental. I have had clients who purchased a home and had an extra room or two and they rented it out. So you could create an opportunity for rental income even in your existing home. People do room rentals all the time. You can get yourself on Airbnbs and things like that, just renting out some space in your house. So there's an opportunity, even if you're still living in the house, to create some additional income for yourself. The house itself is going to appreciate over time, which means it's going to increase in value. Here in the San Antonio market, we see anywhere from 2 to 4% appreciation every year. It definitely depends on what neighborhood you are in and things going on around you. But generally speaking, in our market, we can expect about a 3% appreciation every year. And we don't anticipate that changing. We had, obviously, during the last couple of years, things were very different and we had a huge jump in appreciation. But what we expect going forward is that we're just going to go back to our normal appreciation schedule, which is closer to a 3% each year. So each year that your home increases in value, that just increases your equity in the property. Next, the benefit of owning a home is predictable housing costs with your interests and your principal and your interest payments. They shouldn't change. With a fixed rate mortgage, the principal and interest payments will stay the same. You will have some variability with taxes, property taxes, and your homeowner's insurance, but we'll talk about that in a little bit about how you can save some money there. But what you don't have to worry about when you own your own home is you don't have to worry about your landlord increasing the rent. Next, the benefit of being a homeowner is stability. So you can stay in that house as long as you want. I've had homeowners who purchased a home, moved out and rented it out. They rented it for a year. The tenant that they got was interested in staying for multiple years, but after their first year, when the lease was up, the homeowners decided they wanted to sell it, pull the equity out, and use it for something else. Unfortunately, that tenant only had a 1-year lease and really didn't have an option. He had to move out. He was very upset about it. But that's what happens when you're in a lease. You are only, the landlord is only obligated to honor what is on that current lease. So typically it's for 1, maybe 2 years. And at the end of that lease, if the landlord doesn't want to renew it and they want to sell, you as a renter have to move out. So as long as you own a home, certainly there's no landlord telling you you have to move out. Also, you don't have a landlord increasing your rent. You're locked in with your typically a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Lastly, when you own your home, you have control over it. So you have control over simple things like renovations, decorating, changing things to suit your needs or your desires. You don't have to check with a landlord for permission to do those kind of things. Also, if you've ever rented or if you're renting now and you've experienced problems with a landlord or property manager doing repairs in a timely fashion, as a homeowner, you don't have to worry about that. You're in control of those repairs. You can make them as quickly as you need to. You can choose the vendors that you want to choose that are going to do the quality work that you would prefer done. So that's nice to have control over that, and you're not waiting for someone else to do the work for you. And lastly, just simple things like choosing paint colors and landscape to make changes to your home. You don't have to check with someone who owns the property to do those things, who might just say no, or you might have an HOA that has an input. But in general, you have a lot more flexibility and control over your home as a homeowner versus a renter. So those are just some of the benefits to being a homeowner. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about what goes into your monthly mortgage payment, which is the first thing that you want to consider as far as dollars and cents. So to stay on budget, you need to know what your budget is. And most people's budget is on a monthly basis. So we're going to look at that monthly payment that goes into your mortgage, what that includes. And then we'll talk about how we can look at each one of those things and make them as low as possible. So with your monthly mortgage payment, one, you're paying down on your principal. So we already talked about that. That's paying down on your loan. You also have an interest payment that's larger. Initially, your interest payment is a lot larger than your principal, but over the course of the loan, as you pay down on the loan, your principal will get larger and your interest payment will get smaller, but always those two things will equal the same amount. And so in today's market, we're seeing between 5 and 8% interest, depending on your personal situation and the scenario in how you purchase the house, whether or not you bought down the interest rate, if the seller is offering you incentives. The next part of your monthly mortgage payment is going to be insurance. If you're putting insurance and taxes into escrow, then you would have to pay insurance as part of your mortgage payment. And one thing I wanted to point out is newer homes typically cost a little bit less, with your insurance costs. So that's something to keep in mind. And then property taxes, this can be a huge portion of your, if you look in the little graph there, the light green is your taxes. It's a big chunk of your payment every month. And there's a lot of variability, even in our area, of how much you're going to be paying towards property taxes. So anywhere from 1.9 to 2.7 in our general, in the Northeast area. I think if you get outside of, even further out from the city, you might be able to get a little bit lower, but there's a lot of variability there that can affect what your monthly payment is. And then you have mortgage insurance, which can be called either MIP or PMI. And this is applicable with FHA and conventional loans. It's not, you don't have to pay it with a VA loan. If you get a conventional loan, you actually, the mortgage insurance will drop off at the point where you either pay 20% as your down payment initially, or if you don't do that initially, but your balance reaches 78% of the original value of the home, that mortgage insurance will drop off. So in that case, your monthly payment will actually change, and it'll lessen once you drop off that mortgage insurance, which is nice. So the little graph on the right-hand side of this just shows you the different pieces of your payment. And again, this is on that scenario of a $275,000 home. Okay, other monthly payments to consider. So again, we're talking about our budget, and we want to make sure that we're staying on budget. So we do want to consider other things to include your utilities. So even if you're in an apartment, you have your utilities, but if you're going to buy a house, there are some things to think about to keep those utility payments lower. So first of all, newer homes are certainly more energy efficient, and they will keep your utility bills down. We have a lot of homes nowadays that have solar panels on them, and those will lower your utility bills. When you're looking at solar panels on a home that you might purchase, however, you want to keep in mind to ask, are those solar panels owned currently by the current owner? Are they being leased? And what will be the obligation to the new homeowner, whether or not they have to pay on those, whether they have to take over the lease, they have to pay off the solar panels, or if the seller will pay those off. So something to keep in mind, but certainly solar panels will keep your utility bills low. And then utilities are lower when you have a smaller house. So keeping your square footage smaller will keep your utility costs down. Something else to consider is a MUD or a PID. A MUD is a municipal utility district, and a PID is a public improvement district. In either case, they're a separate entity that can collect money. Usually you'll see that in the appraisal district. It's considered extra taxation, but it goes towards either utilities or improvement in that area. It can be considerable though. The nice thing is right now, we just changed our contracts to require that to be disclosed with a sales contract. So if you are purchasing a home today, the seller should be disclosing whether or not there's a MUD or a PID involved. So it's not only all of the taxing entities, but then this is added in addition to. So you want to keep that in mind because that will increase your monthly payment. And then lastly, we have HOA fees. So HOA fees vary from, less than $100 for an entire year, or they go up to in the thousands as far as how much you're going to pay per year to belong to an HOA. And that usually depends on the amenities that are provided, how much land they have to take care of, common area that they have to work on as far as maintenance and landscaping. There are two places that you can look. Well, the hoa.texas.gov is a website that you can look at to see some of those fees, but also each HOA typically has their own website. So you want to take a look at that. Keep in mind when you're purchasing a home, in addition to your basic transfer fee, there could be capital improvement fees, and that will actually increase your closing costs and fees at closing cost. So, or fees at closing. So just something we want to keep in mind if there is an HOA. All right. So what cash do I need? So we've talked about why would you want to own a home. We've talked about what goes into that monthly payment. So when you get pre-qualified for a house, your budget that you're looking at really has to do with what you're going to be paying on a monthly basis. But I think this is the category that really throws people off, and where there's a lot of people out there who are renting today. This is the part that stops them. They think, I can't afford to buy a house because I don't have 20% in the bank right now to make a down payment. And the reality is, you don't need that. You don't need 20% of the sales price as a down payment. So I want to talk about right now exactly what it is that you're going to need cash in the bank to qualify for a house. And first, I'm going to talk about all of the variable parts to it and what you could have to pay. And then we're going to talk about how you can get those down to almost nothing and get into a house for the least amount of money. So to start off with, you're going to need cash right at contract signing and within the first 10 days. There's 3 things that you want to keep in mind. And this is something I always tell my buyers when we start shopping. Just remember, the bank may have approved you for a $300,000 house, but you've got to have cash in the bank right now because you're going to need it as soon as we sign a contract. And the first thing is going to be earnest money, which is typically 1% of the home purchase price. This is going to be due as soon as you sign that contract and it's accepted by the seller. Everybody signs. Your earnest money is due within the first 72 hours. So for our scenario, we're talking about this $275,000 house. They would owe, as a buyer, you would need to write a check for $2,750. Then you've got option fee, which is about $100, and that's also due at contract signing. The option fee is basically a small amount of money that holds the property during the option period so that the seller can't write a contract with someone else. It holds that property for the one person who's under contract, and it allows them time to do their due diligence, to look at the property, do inspections, negotiate repairs with the seller, and make sure that this is the house for them. An option period is usually about 10 days. So the fee is typically $10 per day. So it's a fairly small amount. This amount, however, if you choose to terminate that contract, that money is gone and it stays with the seller. Your earnest money, however, will go back to you if you choose to terminate during the option period. And then the third fee that you're going to have to pay right up front is an inspection. So it's about $450 to do an inspection. You're going to want to do that during the option period to make sure that there's no major concerns with the house, structural issues, major expenses, roof, needing to be replaced. And once you get that information back from the inspector, then you can present that to the seller in the form of a repair amendment and make some requests for repairs. And you're going to negotiate all of that during your option period. If you can't make it work with the seller, the nice thing is you can terminate that contract and get out of it and move on to another home. But you would have to have spent the option fee and your inspection cost, but you'll get your earnest money back. Then the other parts that you're going to need in cash that are separate from what you're getting from the bank, which is, your lender, is down payment, which is going to be due at closing, keeping in mind that VA and USDA loans do not require a down payment. You can do a 0 down loan with those 2 types of loans, but you can also do a down payment if you'd like to, but it's not required. With an FHA loan, there's a minimum of a 3.5% down payment. So there is a small down payment required. And then conventional loans, anywhere from 3 to 5% minimum down payment. So again, the general thought is I have to have 20% of the sales price as a down payment, and that's not the case. As low as 3% on a non-VA or USDA loan. And if you're a veteran, you qualify for a 0 down payment loan. And USDA loans, in case you're not familiar, these are based on a person's income and also the location of the property. So typically it's outside of the city limits. So there are areas that qualify for a USDA loan, and then the person themselves also needs to qualify for that program. But those are some ways to get reduced or 0 down payment loans. And then the next part of your cash due at closing is closing costs. The big parts to that are going to be 1 year of homeowner's insurance. This is what we call prepaid. So you're paying upfront for your homeowner's insurance. You're going to be paying 3 months in property taxes. You've got fees to go to the lender and then fees that go to the title company. So these are all considered closing costs. And the next screen is going to show that a little bit more detail. And then sometimes a lender in qualifying you for that loan is also going to require you to have some money in the bank as a backup. So sometimes 3 times your monthly mortgage payment is going to be required. That's going to be up to your lender. So something you just want to keep in the back of your mind. You know, sometimes they don't like to see it go all the way down to zero. You've used all of your cash just to get into the house. Because what if there's an emergency right as you move in, you lose your job? They want to make sure that you have a backup. So that's a possibility that you may need that. You want to talk to your lender about whether or not that's required on your loan. Okay, so for the scenario that we're talking about, $275,000 house, we're going to use an FHA loan, which is 3.5% down payment and interest rate of 6.5%. So back to that monthly payment of $24.59. So that's what we had already budgeted for. But now we want to look at what cash do we need to bring to closing. So there's the number. It's $20,000. So even though it's only 3.5% down payment, yikes, you know, $20,000 seems like a lot. But relatively speaking to 20% down, it's not. But so in this scenario, if you had to pay all of your closing costs, pay all your prepaids, that's about what you would have to pay. And here on the right-hand side, it shows a little bit, it breaks down those prepaid costs, which is your insurance, your taxes, and you do pay a little bit of interest up front on the loan. And then you've got at the bottom, it just shows you that overall those fixed costs plus your down payment equals that $19,655. And then the next slide is going to break it up a little bit even further. So this just shows you what are those fixed costs that you're paying for at closing. You've got a title policy, you've got admin fee, wire fee, attorney's fees. Not that any attorney is representing you, but they have filled out some paperwork, so you've got to pay them a little bit. The lender sometimes will have an origination fee, so you have to ask the lender about what fees they charge. These are all just general, but to give you an idea of the ballpark. But you've got your origination fee, underwriting. You will have to pay for an appraisal so that your lender is sure that they're loaning the right amount of money, that this home is not worth less than what they're loaning to you. Credit report, they're going to run your credit, processing fee, etc. So these are your fixed costs and what goes into that cash that you need to bring to closing. Okay. And then, so here's a new scenario. So same house, $275,000 home purchase. We're still going to use an FHA loan. We're still going to do 3.5% down, but let's look at what it looks like if now we can convince the seller to give us some incentives and help us to reduce those expenses at closing. So in this case, we're going with a 5% interest rate, and the seller is going to pay closing costs and buy down that interest rate. So if you look on the right-hand side, instead of $19,000, we're now down to $9,000, and the interest rate is much lower, which see what that did to the monthly payment. That reduced your monthly payment by $200, going from 6.5% down to 5%. So you're saving $200 every month in your monthly payment, and you've cut your closing costs in half. And there are sellers out there that are offering this incentive, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I just wanted to show you how just changing that interest rate has a huge impact on your monthly payment. And if you can get the seller to pay closing costs, that can really change what it looks like at closing for you, what your expenses are going to be. But even better would now be a VA loan, same house, $275,000. We've got the interest rate down to 5%, sellers paying all the closing costs. And the VA loan, one thing you have to keep in mind is there is a funding fee that is charged if you're a veteran. But if you have 10% or more of VA disability, so you have to be a veteran, active duty members can get a VA loan, but they will not be able to get the disability until they're a veteran and out of the service. So they'll pay the funding fee, but if you are a veteran and you have at least 10% of disability, you don't pay a funding fee. So with that scenario, now we are down to a $21.38 monthly payment, and that's because you don't pay mortgage insurance with a VA loan. So that's what reduced the monthly payment there. And then as you can see, you bring to closing absolutely nothing. So you still had to bring up front, I forgot to do the math for you guys, but I did it in advance, with your earnest money, your option fee, and your inspection costs for this house, for $275,000 house. It's going to cost you about $3,300 cash out of pocket to write those checks. But in this scenario, if you're a VA buyer and it's no down payment and the seller's paid all your closing costs, you'll actually get that back at closing. So they'll write you a check when you close on the house, and you'll get that money and you can put it back in the bank. So that's just a couple of different scenarios. And now I'm going to show you just some examples of where you can find those great deals. So new construction right now, new construction is a great opportunity to get some great savings. And I think people are maybe missing out on that and not aware of the fact that builders have put a lot of houses on the ground in the last couple of months. They've got inventory, and in the slower market, they are willing to negotiate. So I've just selected 3 options, 3 scenarios, different builders. There's a lot more, but just for the purpose of this class, I just wanted to show these. So Century Communities, really nice product. I like their houses. They're a little bit less cookie cutter, and they have some unique characteristics to them. Right now, they are offering a 5% interest rate for 30 years. All your closing costs are covered, and they're throwing in refrigerator, blinds, and garage door opener, which is something to keep in mind when you buy new construction. A refrigerator is never part of a real estate deal, but can be thrown in with it. But blinds and garage door opener, people don't realize when you buy new construction, that's not included. So that's something that hopefully you have a good realtor and they can negotiate to get those included in your sales price, but they do not automatically come with most communities. Some they do, you have to find out, but in most cases, those are not part of the deal. So, and if you look, Century Communities, they've got lots of affordable, as low as $238,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Of course, we're talking about smaller square footage, but it's a place to get started. And these options go up to $278,000. So there's a lot. I mean, there's certainly tons of options in the new construction world, but I just wanted to show you these scenarios. This is Pulte. So Pulte Centex, same company, just different branding for higher end products. They're offering a 5.5% rate lock for 30 years and $10,000 towards closing costs. So you might have a few additional fees to pay at closing, but that's a huge chunk off of what you'd have to bring to closing. Let's see. And then their scenario, I mean, anywhere from 260 or 245 up into the 370s, just, on these selection. But, well, actually the first one's 233,000 in that particular neighborhood. So lots of options under the Pulte Centex brand. And then D.R. Horton, I mean, D.R. Horton is all over the city. There's tons of these communities. They're offering 3.99 for your first year with an FHA loan. And then for the remaining 29 years, 4.99% interest rate. So these are all great interest rates. This is a way to get that long-term savings, is by doing new construction. And if you do conventional loan, they've got a 5.99% interest rate, and they've got some options here. This is in a neighborhood in Seguin, really nice community, not too far out, but great product and great interest rates that they're offering right now. So let's look at some of the other pieces of the puzzle and how we can really get those a little bit lower when you're shopping, to make sure that you're taking advantage of all the discounts that are out there. So how do monthly taxes, your property taxes, affect your monthly mortgage payment? With a $275,000 home, I did the calculation on these. Assuming you have no homestead exemption or no exemptions, the variation between these different property tax rates can be up to $173 per month between the highest property tax rate and the lowest. And this is just in the Northeast area. So Shirt, Cibolo, Selma. I didn't even look on the far west side. There's so much variability just in that small area. I just wanted to give you a snapshot of that. So it's really important to look at property taxes and the tax rate with each individual house. Sales price is not the only thing that's going to affect your budget. This has a huge impact. So this is just one way to make sure that you're shopping in areas that are going to keep your monthly payments low. So in this category, Selma in Guadalupe County, because several cities are in multiple counties, but Selma, the part of the city that's in Guadalupe County, has really the lowest tax rate. And then Universal City is the flip side with the higher tax rate in this area. So just something to keep in mind, again, all over the city. And usually if you're outside of city limits, you're going to have a lower tax rate. So that's helpful. Guadalupe County in general has lower tax rates than Bexar County. So also something to keep in mind. You guys are doing really good not asking any questions, but now I'm hoping that you have some questions. Okay. Timing. So how does timing affect your budget? Interestingly enough, the time of year that you go shopping for a house can affect how much you pay for a house. And there are some things that you can predict and some things that you can't. So we want to worry about the things that we can control and that we can predict so that we can help ourselves get those lower sales prices. So spring and summer are the busiest buying seasons by far. And especially that's, I think, across the nation. But here in San Antonio, which is Military City, USA, we have a lot of military personnel that PCS. And there's two major PCS cycles. One is in the summer and one is over Christmas. And so as we are getting ready for that summer move cycle, all of those military personnel looking for orders, once they get orders or have an idea where they're going, if they know they're coming here, they're in the market and they're shopping. So there's a lot more people out there looking for houses, which means there's more competition. There's usually more houses that are on that market on the market at that time, but still the competition usually outweighs the inventory. And when that happens, you're looking at multiple offers on higher demand properties. When you have multiple offers, the likelihood of you paying full price or even over list price is high. So we're talking about saving money. So we don't want to pay those higher sales prices. So fall and winter, much better time to be shopping. There's less competition. You have a higher probability of negotiating with a seller on not only price, but what I would argue is more important is getting money towards your closing costs and lowering your interest rates. Because if they're willing to give you $10,000, even $20,000, they don't care if they're paying it to you in closing costs or if they're taking it off the sales price. It's the same net to them. For you as a buyer, it's in your best interest to take it as a concession towards closing costs or interest, because that has a more of a financial impact for you in the long run. And something else that you can anticipate is that there should be appreciation in our market, in most markets, and here in San Antonio, just year over year. So how does timing affect your budget in that respect? Well, if you're thinking, should I buy a house this year or should I wait until next year and see if interest rates go down or if things change? Well, you can wait, but chances are the house that was $300,000 today is going to be $310,000 next year. So while you might save in some respects, chances are you're going to pay more for that same house. So somebody said, when's the best time to buy a house? Yesterday. So it's always before. If I'd known before, I would have jumped in when the interest rates were in the 2s or 3s. But you never know. You can't predict these things, but we can predict certain things like appreciation and the move cycle being more competitive in the spring, summer, and more favorable for a buyer in the fall and winter. There are things that we can't predict, like interest rates. We don't really know what's going to happen. What we're hearing is that we expect them to stay about where they are for at least another 12 months. So certainly the saying is marry the house and date the rate, which means find a house you love. And if that interest rate goes down, you can always refinance, but start thinking about getting into a house today so you can build equity. And if you refinance, that just means you'll build equity faster, but you're still building equity even at the interest rate that we have today. You also can't predict future global events. So nobody could really predict COVID. No one had any idea how that would impact the housing market. But if you look at what happened prices went up because the cost of building went up, but the demand went up because people were suddenly trying to move out of the cities and get away from people, and everything was just shifting and changing. And it was a very unusual market for several years. So no one really could have anticipated that, but we lived through it, and possible something crazy like that's going to happen in the future, but we can't really predict that. So focus more on the things that we can predict and things that you can control. So what does our current market look like? So our fall season, we're in the fall season right now. We do have less competition now, fewer multiple offers that we're seeing. I mean, it's still possible depending on the house and the location, but definitely a better situation for a buyer. It's still a seller's market, so don't get me wrong with that. But compared to where we'll be in the spring, a buyer's in a much better position now than you will be in the spring as far as having to be able to negotiate. Sellers right now are willing to offer incentives. They're willing to pay closing costs. Interest rates right now are around 7%, and we don't expect them to decrease in the next 12 months. So waiting till the spring for lower interest rates is not something we're anticipating. So you're just going to see higher sales prices at that time and more competition. And the inventory right now. So you might feel like, well, we've talked about there's not as many homes on the market in the fall and then in the spring, but we've got over 5,000 houses. So we've got just in San Antonio Board of Realtors in our MLS, we have 5,336 homes on the market for sale less than $354,000. And that doesn't even include all of the new construction homes. So there are a ton of choices out there. You just need one house, but you have a lot to pick from. And I really encourage buyers to get out there and look at a lot of things so that you know, you're looking for your dream home, but there's going to be a compromise in there somewhere. So it's best to get out there and see what's out there so you have an idea of what your options are. And when you're ready to make the decision on buying a house, you feel comfortable with that house that you're selecting at that time. So that's a little bit of what's going on right now. Something else I wanted to point out for military personnel, since we do have a ton of military personnel here in the San Antonio area, is just to remind you that as a veteran or an active duty member, you have the opportunity to use a VA loan. There are some eligibility requirements, so you want to check on that. Usually it's time in service. And if you've used your VA loan before, and you may still have eligibility tied up somewhere else. But in general, it's a great product. You get a 0 down payment loan, lower interest rates, and 0 funding fee for veterans who have at least 10% disability rating. You also, if you have 100% disability rating, 0 property taxes in the state of Texas. If it's less than 100% disability rating, there are still additional disability exemptions that you can apply for, and it will reduce your property taxes, not nearly to 0, but it's every little bit helps. And then I just wanted to point out with JB Goen Realtors, we offer a program called U.S. Military on the Move. And when you use that, we offer you up to 20% back of our commission back to you at closing. So that's really a big help. If you do have closing costs to cover, that can go towards your closing costs. And then homestead exemptions, or exemptions in general, how do they help? Well, you want to make sure that you apply for them immediately once you get into the house, but homestead exemption is specifically for your primary residence. And what that's going to do when you apply it to your house, it's going to reduce the appraisal value that you're going to be taxed. And it also protects your value from going up more than 10% each year. We just talked about disability. 100% disability rating means no property taxes. There's a reduced exemption there for reduced disability ratings. And then if you're over 65, there's other exemptions. There's also agricultural exemptions. So there are exemptions that you can apply to your property. So you want to explore all of the ones that are applicable for your property and make sure you apply them immediately upon closing on your house. Bottom line, so your budget checklist that you want to consider to keep your monthly payments low and your cash at closing low. Number 1 is square footage. Keep the house small. Think about what you need today and think about what you can work with. And you can always grow into another house. And while you're working with a smaller home, you can be building equity that can be used towards a larger home in the future. 2-story versus 1-story. A 2-story house actually costs less than a 1-story house of the same square footage. So keep that in mind. A lot of people around here love 1-story. They don't want to climb the stairs. But if you're looking at a budget, you can save money by considering 2-story homes. Look at your locations for taxing. Make sure that you're in a location where property taxes are on the lower side. Get the seller to pay your closing costs. Get the seller to buy down your interest rate. Consider newer homes, not necessarily just new construction, but just a newer home, 2-3-year-old home. They're definitely going to have lower utility costs. Look at properties that have no HOA fees or lower HOA fees. Make sure you're shopping in the fall or winter to reduce competition and keep your sales price or your sales prices low or your incentives high. If you have the ability to, use a VA or USDA loan. And then make sure that you're applying for those exemptions as quickly as possible to keep your property taxes low. So that's just kind of a budget checklist to keep in mind as you're shopping, and all of the different variables that go into your monthly payment and your money at closing that can really have a huge impact on your wallet. So for those of you who say, well, maybe I should just keep renting, I put this graphic up there. Again, I'll provide all these slides so you can really dig into the details. But what I want to point out is, if I take that same house that we're talking about buying for $275,000 and compare it to renting a house for $2,200 a month rent, which, rent is not getting cheap these days. So let's compare a rental house to a house that we just bought. There's all kinds of ways to look at this, but let's look at the bottom line here. If you, after 5 years of living in a house that you purchased versus a house that you rented, where do you end up? So if you walk away from a house that you've rented after 5 years, what do you take with you? All your personal belongings, and that is it. You have zero money in equity. You have saved zero money. It's all gone to your landlord, and he thanks you for building up his personal wealth. If you bought a house today and 5 years later you sell it, this little calculator works through all of those variables, what it should appreciate to, so what your sales price would be, your payoff amount on your loan, what taxes you would owe, and then what closing costs that you would owe. But basically, what would you walk away with if you sold your house after 5 years is $53,000. So that's really what you put in the bank for yourself by being a homeowner versus being a renter. So just something to keep in mind. I think one of my sweetest clients, she was just wonderful, but she had been renting for 14 years, and we did the math, how much money she just was gone because she rented for so long and opted to not buy. And when she finally bought, I think she was really excited, but she's still very cautious about it. But at some point, being a homeowner is really about investing in your future. So this is, I thought, just a good graphic to show you what that looks like in real numbers. And lastly, I'd like to point out that sometimes buying just isn't the right thing for you because you just don't qualify for a mortgage, and that's understandable. It happens. There are programs that are kind of like a good bridge option that you're not ready to buy today, but within the next 3 years, you're going to be ready. You got to get out of where you're at, and so you need to move anyway. If you use one of these two programs, it's Home Partners and Divvy are two that I have worked with personally. They offer you what's called a lease with the right to purchase. And this allows you to get into a new house that's on the market right now for sale, but you're still going to be a renter. These companies will buy the property and lease it back to you. And you have up to 3 years to qualify to purchase that house. And then you just buy it directly from the company who is your landlord at that point. The sales price is worked into the lease. It's predetermined when you sign the lease, so you know exactly what you'll pay for it at year 1, 2, or 3. The rent is slightly higher than market rent, but it's the convenience of not having to move multiple times. And Divvy, actually, part of what they collect every month in their rent, they're setting aside for you as part of your down payment. So they're trying to help you build equity or build a nest egg, essentially, to put towards your down payment, because they know that's sometimes really hard for first-time home buyers, is collecting that, even that minimal 3.5% down payment. So just another option to keep in mind. So that is why one of the great reasons that you should buy a home is building wealth, having control over your where you live, whether it's the comfort or the maintenance of it, but just thinking about your future and growing your wealth for the future. And hopefully from this presentation, you were able to learn a little bit more about all the variables that go into that. And now it's time for questions if anybody has any. So thank you for being so patient and quiet. Does anybody have a question? And you can either shout it out or put it in the, oh, I gotta get my arrow over. Put it in the chat section. Anyone? Not required. Oh, thanks, Cheryl. You can, I'll pat myself on the back. Yes, Allison, what is your question? I'm so excited.
Hi. Okay, I finally figured out how to unmute myself. So
Hey.
good. That's good. Well, okay, so I'm not sure how this is gonna work out for us, but we right now in the house that we're renting, we've been renting for 4 years here. Actually, you found the house for us, and we love it. So I am going to offer to buy the house from the owners. I put a bug in the property manager's ear. Anyway, my question is, if they were willing to sell the house to us, would we use a realtor to because I feel like I don't know what I'm doing and what to look for and what to ask for and what to make sure happens and just things like that. So do you know the best way to go about that situation?
Well, so that's a unique situation, but it does happen. And I definitely recommend you getting an excellent realtor, maybe one that you've worked with before.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you want to be represented. And I will tell you, I've done it before where I've facilitated. So I can facilitate the sale if both parties are comfortable doing their own thing. If they're not, I can represent one party like you, and we can work it in, we can just work an arrangement with the seller and just say, I'm going to represent the buyer. If you'd like to represent yourself, great. And we can just negotiate a commission, because it would be kind of a non-standard scenario. If they're not on the market, they're probably hoping to not have to pay a commission, but you definitely do want to be represented, because you're right. Like, as we talked about that, just going through the option period, doing an inspection, making sure that you do your due diligence. I mean, you're living in the house, so you kind of have an idea of the, what's going on. But homeowners who live in houses for, like, let's just say my parents who lived in the same house for almost 40 years and sold it, they were shocked at all the things that came up on a home inspection when they sold it. And sometimes you just don't know, but it could be something that's just about to give way. And now when you're, the primary financial responsibility on the houses, or for the house, is you don't want to be the person that now has to pay for a new roof and a new water heater and a new HVAC system. So the home inspection process will help you with that, but also just getting through that entire process. So yeah, there's definitely, I would recommend being represented. And, if you and I can talk about that offline, but we can talk to your landlord and say, hey, would you be comfortable? We want to do this. And here's just a suggestion of, I can help out, and how's that going to work out for you? So.
Okay. Thanks. I didn't mean to ask just a personal question that only applies to me.
Well, I mean, it does happen. I've actually helped several people, and I actually owned a property. I rented it out to a family, and then they ended up buying it from me. And I thought, well, I'm a realtor. Surely they'll just use me, and we'll just do it together. And they went ahead and got themselves their own realtor, which is probably smarter, because they wanted to be represented by someone who obviously was an objective third party. So it makes sense, and it's not totally uncommon. So
okay.
Anybody else have questions? All right, all you wonderful people, it is 7:52. So thank you for keeping it under 1 hour. It's not even 8 o'clock yet, but like I said, I will wrap this up and send it out for use to yourselves, share it with your friends, family, whatever. And thank you so much for spending a Thursday evening with me. Oh, Michelle, did you have a question? Or were you just clapping? Sometimes
Oops, I'm sorry, I didn't. I accidentally hit that. But thank you, Jill. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right. Well, you guys all take care. I'm going to stop recording and let you guys go about your evening. Take care.
Thank you, Jill.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jill.